4 days after the Duchess disappeared, life at Ashford Hall continued with such perfect order that no one beyond the household suspected anything had changed. The breakfast bell rang precisely at 8. Footmen carried polished silver through the dining room. Gardeners trimmed the climbing roses beneath the eastern terrace. Tenant farmers arrived with ledgers tucked beneath their arms, hoping for the Duchess's advice on rents and harvests. Even the chapel doors stood open for morning prayers exactly as they had every day for years. Only one thing was missing. The woman who had quietly held the entire estate together was gone. Strangely, His Grace, Adrian Montfort, Duke of Ashford, did not yet know it. But this is not the story of the day she left. It is the story of the 1,000 quiet moments that taught her she eventually would. 12 years earlier, when Lady Catherine Fairchild married the Duke of Ashford inside the ancient stone church overlooking the village, every newspaper described it as one of the happiest unions of the season. She was admired for her kindness more than her beauty. He was respected throughout Parliament for his discipline, intelligence, and unwavering devotion to duty. Society believed they were perfectly matched. They were wrong. They were not unhappy on their wedding day. They were simply strangers who believed affection would naturally grow beside responsibility. As the carriage carried them toward Ashford Hall beneath showers of autumn leaves, Catherine looked through the window at the vast estate that would become her home. Rolling fields disappeared into ancient oak forests. A lake reflected the fading afternoon sun. Beyond it stood the great manor, its honey-coloured stone glowing warmly against the October sky. Adrian noticed her staring. "It can be overwhelming at first," he said. She smiled. "Then I shall spend the rest of my life making it worthy of us." He believed she was speaking about the house. She was speaking about their marriage. During her first months as Duchess, Catherine devoted herself entirely to learning every responsibility expected of her. She rose before the household each morning to review menus with the cook and accounts with the housekeeper. She visited cottages occupied by elderly tenants who could no longer travel to the village. She reopened the estate school 3 afternoons each week after discovering it had quietly fallen into neglect following the death of Adrian's father. She established a sewing circle for widows before winter arrived and insisted every child living on Ashford land receive proper boots before the first snowfall. She learned the names of every servant. She remembered birthdays. She remembered illnesses. She noticed when someone's smile seemed forced. Before long, people no longer referred to Ashford Hall as the Duke's estate. They simply called it the Duchess's home. Adrian admired how smoothly everything functioned. He rarely asked himself why. Whenever guests praised the household, he accepted the compliments with polite satisfaction. "Lady Ashford has transformed this place," visiting neighbours often remarked. Adrian would glance toward his wife with a brief smile before returning to discussions of legislation or estate investments. He never understood that she did not need admiration from society. She only wanted to know that her husband noticed. Ashford Hall was never empty. Adrian's widowed mother still occupied the West Wing and maintained strong opinions regarding tradition. His younger sister, Lady Helena, possessed exceptional beauty and equal confidence, often mistaking bluntness for honesty. His youngest brother Edward had not yet completed his education and returned home each holiday, bringing youthful chaos wherever he went. Catherine welcomed them all without complaint. She listened patiently to the Dowager Duchess's endless stories about how things had once been done. She comforted Edward whenever examinations discouraged him. She helped Helena prepare for her first London season with more care than Helena herself considered necessary. Servants often whispered that the Duchess possessed the patience of a saint. Catherine simply believed family meant service before self. Her own dreams quietly disappeared without anyone asking what they had been. The first Christmas after the wedding arrived wrapped in heavy snow. Catherine spent weeks preparing every detail. Choir rehearsals echoed through the chapel. Evergreen. Garlands decorated every staircase. Gifts were carefully chosen for servants who had faithfully served the family for decades. She supervised every arrangement herself, hoping their first Christmas as husband and wife would become a cherished memory. 2 days before Christmas, Adrian entered her morning room carrying correspondence from his mother. "Mother has decided we shall spend Christmas at Blackthorn House." Catherine looked up from tying ribbons around parcels for the village children. "Then we must finish packing." Adrian hesitated. "Mother wishes only the immediate Ashford family to attend." Catherine smiled uncertainly. "I am your family." "Of course you are. But you know how Mother values old traditions." The room grew quiet. Catherine lowered another ribbon onto a parcel. "Will you return by Boxing Day?" "Most likely." She nodded gently. "Then I shall make certain everything here is ready when you come home." On Christmas morning she stood at the library window watching his carriage disappear beneath falling snow. Then she turned, smiled at the waiting servants, and said softly, "We mustn't disappoint the children. Christmas should remain joyful." Not one servant realized the Duchess spent Christmas dinner alone. Adrian returned 3 days later carrying thoughtful gifts purchased in London. "I trust everything went smoothly." Catherine smiled exactly as she always did, perfectly. She never mentioned spending Christmas without him. He never asked. The years settled into familiar patterns. Every spring brought garden parties. Every summer welcomed house guests. Every autumn filled the estate with harvest festivals. Every winter ended with another lonely Christmas. At every ball, Adrian escorted Catherine into the ballroom with impeccable courtesy before disappearing into conversations concerning Parliament, trade, or military affairs. She danced when asked, smiled when spoken to, sat alone whenever music ended. Guests gradually accepted it as normal. One evening, during a charity ball hosted by the Marquess of Alderley, Lady Beatrice Norwood remarked loudly to a companion, "The Duchess spends more evenings with strangers than with her own husband." Several ladies laughed behind their fans. Catherine pretended not to hear. Adrian stood only a few yards away discussing railway expansion with 2 members of Parliament. He had heard every word. He said nothing. Later, while their carriage rolled through moonlit streets toward Ashford Hall, Catherine asked quietly, "Did Lady Norwood's remark not trouble you?" Adrian looked up from the parliamentary papers resting upon his lap. "People enjoy gossip. She humiliated me. Ignore her." 2 words, spoken without anger, spoken without thought. Yet Catherine carried them in silence for years. Ignore her. She obeyed. She ignored the whispers. She ignored the loneliness. She ignored the empty evenings. She ignored the growing ache inside a marriage that appeared perfect to everyone else. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Catherine arranged dinner inside the old glass conservatory overlooking the south gardens. It was where Adrian had first smiled at her. After their engagement, candles reflected against the glass ceiling. Fresh roses perfumed the evening air. His favourite wine rested unopened beside 2 crystal glasses. She wore the sapphire earrings he had once admired shortly after their marriage. 7 o'clock passed, then 8. At 9:30, the butler entered quietly. "Your Grace, His Grace has sent word from London. A debate has continued longer than expected. He asks for your understanding." Catherine looked at the untouched dinner before smiling politely. "Please, thank the cook. Everything was beautiful." The candles burned until midnight. The following afternoon Adrian returned. "I hope you weren't disappointed." Catherine folded the embroidery resting in her lap. "No. Certain responsibilities cannot be postponed. I understand." She truly did understand. That was the tragedy. She always understood. She simply wondered why no one ever tried to understand her. 2 years later, joy returned unexpectedly when Catherine learned she was expecting a child. Hope filled every room of Ashford Hall. She embroidered tiny blankets herself. She spent evenings imagining a nursery filled with laughter. Adrian appeared, genuinely delighted. For the first time in years they spoke of the future instead of obligations. Then winter arrived. So did heartbreak. The child was lost before it ever drew breath. The physician spoke gently. The household moved through whispered conversations. Catherine lay awake through the night, wondering how something so loved could disappear so quickly. Adrian remained beside her until dawn, holding her hand without speaking. For one brief moment she believed grief might finally bring them together. As morning light touched the curtains, he quietly stood. "You are leaving," she whispered. He buttoned his coat. "Parliament votes today." She stared at him. "Our child died yesterday." Pain crossed his face. Real pain. "I know." "Then stay." He closed his eyes for only a moment. Duty cannot wait. He kissed her forehead before walking toward the door. The carriage wheels echoed across the courtyard minutes later. Catherine listened until the sound disappeared completely. Something inside her did not break that morning. It simply became quieter than it had ever been before. And, though she did not yet know it, the long road that would one day carry her away from Ashford Hall had already begun. One rainy afternoon, while the Duke remained in London attending a prolonged sitting of Parliament, a footman arrived unexpectedly from the family's townhouse in Brook Street, carrying Adrian's leather dispatch box. Bowing respectfully, he said, "Your Grace, Mr. Ellis offers his apologies. Several estate papers requiring His Grace's attention were packed by mistake. He requested that the dispatch box be returned to Ashford Hall." Catherine thanked the man and instructed that it be taken to the Duke's study. She followed a few moments later, intending only to remove the estate ledgers that required no further delay. The study smelled faintly of leather, sealing wax and old books. She placed the dispatch box upon Adrian's desk and lifted the lid. The ledgers lay exactly where the footman had described. As she gathered them into her arms, something beneath them caught her eye. A narrow blue ribbon. Familiar. Slowly she set the ledgers aside and reached for the bundle hidden beneath. Her breath caught. Every envelope bore her own handwriting. "To His Grace, the Duke of Ashford, Brook Street, London." Her fingers trembled as she lifted the first letter. The green wax seal remained perfectly smooth, unbroken. She picked up another, then another. Every one remained sealed exactly as she had sent it. They had reached him safely. They had travelled beside him from London back to Ashford Hall, yet not once had he broken the seal to discover what she had written. The room became painfully still. She untied the ribbon and unfolded the first letter. "My dearest Adrian, the children planted the first spring bulbs today. I wished you might have seen how proud they were." She stopped reading. Carefully she folded it once more, retied the ribbon exactly as she had found it, placed the letters back inside the dispatch box, and closed the lid. Then she quietly left the study. She never spoke of what she had found. That evening Adrian returned from London. He apologised for the length of his absence, thanked her for managing the estate so well, and retired to prepare for dinner. Catherine answered him with the same gentle smile she had worn for 12 years. Watching him disappear upstairs, she realized something that frightened her, far more than anger ever could. She no longer expected him to explain. The days continued much as they always had. Breakfast was served precisely at 8. Estate matters filled Adrian's mornings. The Duchess devoted herself to tenants, servants, charities, and the endless responsibilities that kept Ashford Hall flourishing. Outwardly, nothing had changed. Inwardly, something had quietly come to an end. A few days later, Lord William Pembroke arrived to spend the weekend before returning north to his own estate. Having known Adrian since boyhood, he was one of the few men who could speak honestly without causing offence. During dinner, William watched Catherine excuse herself twice to resolve matters concerning the household before returning to the table, as though nothing had interrupted her evening. He noticed Adrian scarcely looked up from discussing parliamentary affairs with neighbouring gentlemen. Nothing about the dinner appeared unpleasant, yet something about it deeply unsettled him. The following afternoon, Ashford Hall welcomed several neighbouring landowners for luncheon. As always, Catherine ensured every detail reflected effortless perfection. Silver gleamed, fresh flowers filled every room. Servants moved quietly through the corridors with practiced precision. Shortly before the guests were received, Adrian invited William into the blue drawing room. "There is one matter upon which I should value your opinion," he said. Catherine, seeing that refreshments had not yet been brought, lifted a silver tea tray herself and walked toward the drawing room. As she approached the closed door, William's voice reached her before she could knock. "Forgive me, Adrian, but someone ought to tell you." She paused only for a moment, intending to announce herself as soon as there was a break in the conversation. Instead, she heard Adrian reply. "Tell me what?" William answered carefully. "You have become accustomed to your wife's devotion." Adrian laughed quietly. "I hardly see how that is a fault, because I fear you no longer notice it." Silence followed. William continued, "She carries this family upon her shoulders with remarkable grace. Your mother depends upon her. Your brother admires her. Your servants trust her judgment more than their own. Every tenant speaks her name with affection." Adrian sighed patiently. "No one appreciates Catherine more than I do." William's reply came gently. "Appreciation is rarely felt if it is never shown." Catherine remained motionless beyond the door, the polished silver growing heavier in her hands. Inside, Adrian answered without irritation, without cruelty, and without the slightest awareness of how his words would be received. "William, you concern yourself unnecessarily. Catherine understands my duties better than anyone." "Understanding is not the same as being cherished." "She has never complained." William's voice became almost sorrowful. "Perhaps because she loves you." Adrian was silent for a long moment before replying with complete certainty. Where would she go? The words were not spoken in anger. They were spoken with absolute confidence. The confidence of a man who believed the woman who had loved him faithfully for 12 years had nowhere beyond him to build a life. William answered so quietly that Catherine barely heard him. "My friend, I pray you are never given reason to regret believing that." Catherine closed her eyes. The tea tray no longer felt heavy. It felt distant, as though she were holding someone else's burden. In that single moment, every lonely Christmas, every forgotten anniversary, every unanswered letter, every silent carriage ride, every empty chair across the dinner table gathered together into one undeniable truth. Adrian had not merely stopped noticing her, he had stopped believing she possessed the freedom to leave. Without making the slightest sound, She set the untouched tray upon a nearby console table and walked away. She crossed the long gallery lined with portraits of generations who had carried the Ashford name before them. None of those painted faces seemed familiar anymore. By the time she reached her room, her heart was astonishingly calm. She did not weep. She did not rage. She simply knew. That evening she fulfilled every duty expected of the Duchess of Ashford. She welcomed departing guests. She thanked the servants for their work. She visited the kitchens to compliment cook on an excellent luncheon. She wished the Dowager Duchess a peaceful night. She even smiled when Adrian remarked, "Another successful gathering. I could never have managed it without you." "No," Catherine answered softly, "you could not." It was perhaps the truest sentence she had spoken in years. Long after midnight, when the house had surrendered to silence, she lit a single candle and opened her wardrobe. She selected only what belonged to Catherine, not to the Duchess of Ashford. A few simple gowns, practical shoes, her mother's prayer book, a small portrait of her late father, nothing bearing the Ashford crest, nothing purchased merely to fulfill the expectations of her rank. One modest travelling case was enough. Before dawn, she walked slowly through the sleeping house for the final time. She paused outside the nursery that had never welcomed the child she and Adrian had lost. She rested her hand upon the banister polished by 12 years of daily use. Then she entered the Duke's study. Morning had not yet broken. Moonlight spilled across the writing desk where estate papers still waited to be signed. Catherine slipped her wedding ring from her finger and placed it gently at the centre of the desk. Beneath it she laid a folded note written in her own careful hand. "You were right about one thing. I will still be here tomorrow, just not where you expect to find me." She looked around the study one last time. There was no anger in her heart, only an unfamiliar sense of peace. Quietly, she extinguished the candle, crossed the entrance hall, and stepped through the great front doors of Ashford Hall as the first light of dawn touched the eastern sky. The doors closed softly behind her. No servant saw her leave. No carriage waited at the front steps. No farewell was spoken. By sunrise the Duchess was gone, and inside the house she had spent 12 years quietly holding together, no one yet realized that the heart of Ashford Hall had just walked away forever. 4 days passed before Adrian Ashford realized his wife had left. On the first morning, nothing appeared unusual. Breakfast waited upon the dining table precisely at 8. His correspondence had been arranged in orderly stacks within the study. The steward received clear, written instructions concerning tenant matters. The housekeeper carried out her duties exactly as she always had. Adrian assumed Catherine had risen early to visit the estate school or one of the cottages on the southern boundary. She often disappeared into acts of kindness that occupied her for hours. He thought nothing of it. On the second day, he departed before sunrise to inspect drainage works on the western farms, and did not return until after dark. The household remained as orderly as ever. Supper was prepared. His clothes had been laid out for the following morning. A fresh vase of white lilies stood upon the library table, though he never wondered who had placed them there. When he retired for the evening, it never occurred to him that he had not seen his wife for 2 days. On the third morning, the first small cracks appeared. Cook approached the housekeeper in quiet confusion. Her Grace usually approves the menu for the children's supper before breakfast. The housekeeper answered, perhaps she is occupied elsewhere. Later that afternoon, the steward arrived outside the Duke's study, carrying several tenant petitions. "These require the Duchess's judgment, Your Grace." Adrian looked up briefly. "Leave them with her." The steward hesitated. We have been unable to find her Grace since Saturday." Adrian frowned only slightly. "She is somewhere within the house." The steward bowed and withdrew. Adrian returned to his correspondence. That evening the Dowager Duchess remarked during dinner, "I have not seen Catherine today." Adrian continued carving the roast. "She must be visiting the village." His mother accepted the explanation without another question. After all, the Duchess devoted much of her time to charitable works. No one imagined otherwise. Yet Ashford Hall had begun to feel strangely different. Fresh flowers no longer appeared in the morning room. A maid stood uncertainly outside the linen cupboard because only the Duchess knew where additional household inventories had been stored. The estate schoolmaster waited an entire afternoon for instructions regarding repairs to the school roof. One elderly tenant refused to leave without thanking the Duchess personally for the medicine she had arranged for his wife. "Her Grace is unavailable today," the butler explained kindly. The old man looked genuinely disappointed. "Then tell her Thomas Miller prayed for her this morning." The message was carefully written down. There was no Duchess to receive it. By the fourth morning, even the servants could no longer hide their concern. Shortly after breakfast, the butler requested permission to speak privately with the Duke. Adrian looked up from estate accounts. "Yes, Mr. Hargreaves." The elderly butler stood with unusual hesitation. He had served the Ashford family for more than 40 years. Never had he questioned his master unnecessarily. "Forgive me, Your Grace. But when did you last see Her Grace?" Adrian answered almost immediately. "She was present at Lord Pembroke's visit." Mr. Hargreaves remained respectfully silent. Adrian searched his memory. Luncheon, guests, the drawing room. Had he seen Catherine after that? He frowned. "Surely she has been about the house." "We believed so, Your Grace." "You believed?" "No member of the household has seen Her Grace since before dawn 4 mornings ago." For the first time in years, genuine alarm crossed Adrian's face. He stood so abruptly that his chair struck the floor behind him. "Search the house." Mr. Hargreaves lowered his head. "We already have." Adrian crossed the corridors at a pace no servant had ever witnessed. He opened the door to Catherine's sitting room. Empty. Her morning room. Empty. The conservatory. Empty. The chapel. Empty. Finally he entered her bedchamber. At first nothing seemed unusual. Then his eyes settled upon the wardrobe. Half the gowns were gone. The drawers containing her simplest clothing stood nearly empty. Her favourite travelling cloak had disappeared. He slowly turned in the centre of the room. She had not wandered into the village. She had packed. A terrible certainty settled over him. He hurried toward his study. The room looked exactly as he had left it 4 days earlier. Estate papers remained scattered across the desk. The dispatch box rested where it had been placed after returning from London. Then he saw it. His wife's wedding ring. It lay at the centre of the desk where morning sunlight struck the gold. Beneath it rested a folded note. Adrian stared for several moments before lifting the ring with trembling fingers. He unfolded the note. "You were right about one thing. I will still be here tomorrow, just not where you expect to find me." He read the sentence again and again. His legs seemed suddenly unable to support him. He lowered himself into the chair behind the desk, still holding the ring. Then his eyes fell upon the leather dispatch box. Almost without thinking, he opened it. Beneath the estate papers lay a familiar blue ribbon binding a stack of letters. He frowned. Every envelope carried Catherine's handwriting. One by one he lifted them from the box. Every seal remained unbroken. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then horror. These were the letters she had written while he was in London, letters he had intended to read later, letters he had carried home, placed inside the dispatch box, and forgotten beneath endless parliamentary papers and estate accounts. His hands shook as he broke the seal upon the first. My dearest Adrian, the children planted the first spring bulbs today. I wished you might have seen how proud they were. He opened another. Christmas feels strangely quiet without you, though I know your mother must be pleased to have you beside her. Another. The physician believes I must rest more often. I promised him I would try, though I confess I miss our evening conversations more than sleep. Then another, written after the loss of their child. I know duty called you back to London. I pray only that when this sorrow becomes easier to bear, we might bear what remains together. Adrian covered his mouth with one trembling hand. She had told him everything, every hope, every disappointment, every lonely evening, every attempt to keep their marriage alive. She had written it all, and he had never read a single word. He remained alone in the study until dusk, surrounded by the voice of a woman he suddenly realized he had stopped hearing years before. Outside, Ashford Hall continued to function with practiced dignity, but each passing day revealed another piece of the truth. Tenant disputes went unresolved because only the Duchess knew every family's circumstances. Charitable deliveries ceased, while no one could decipher the careful records she had always carried in memory rather than on paper. The servants still performed their duties faithfully, yet laughter gradually disappeared from the corridors. Guests politely declined invitations they once eagerly accepted, remarking that Ashford Hall no longer felt quite the same. Even the Dowager Duchess confessed quietly one evening, "The house seems colder." Adrian looked across the dinner table. Catherine's chair remained exactly where it had always stood. For 12 years she had waited while his chair sat empty. Now his was occupied. Hers never would be again. Weeks became months. Months became years. At last, through an old clergyman who had once served the Ashford estate, Adrian learned that Catherine had settled in a quiet market town many counties away. She lived in a modest stone cottage beside the church gardens, where she devoted her days to educating orphaned girls and assisting the parish poor. She possessed no title there, no grand household, no servants announcing her arrival, yet every face that passed her gate greeted her with genuine affection. Adrian travelled there alone. When Catherine opened the cottage door, time seemed to stop between them. She looked older, so did he, but there was something upon her face he had never seen during their marriage. Peace. He removed his hat. "Catherine," she smiled gently. "Good afternoon, Adrian." He held out the wedding ring he had carried every day since she left. "Come home." She looked at the ring for a long moment before raising her eyes to his. "For years, I believed home was wherever you were." Her voice remained calm. "I was wrong." Adrian felt tears gathering despite every effort to master himself. "I know what I've done." "So do I." "If you can forgive me," she nodded softly. "I forgave you long ago." Hope flickered across his face. Then she continued, "Forgiveness is why I can wish you happiness without returning." He struggled to speak. "You do not love me any more." Catherine's smile never faded. "I do." Tears finally escaped down Adrian's face. She took one slow step backward toward the doorway. "But I have finally learned to love myself too." Neither spoke again. Adrian understood then that the greatest punishment was not losing his Duchess. It was meeting the woman he should have cherished only after she no longer needed him to choose her. Catherine inclined her head with the same grace she had shown throughout 12 years of marriage. Then She quietly closed the cottage door. Adrian remained standing before it for a long time, the wedding ring resting silently in the palm of his hand. At last he turned and walked away alone. Some loves end with betrayal, some end with anger. The saddest end when